Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a brand new show for this year's Ramadan called Waqf, a game changer, here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Of course, Waqf has inspired, has changed the lives of so many within the breadth of the landscape here in South Africa. And we have brought an expert of Waqf, somebody to break down not just the historical aspect, but how Waqf works within the modern day society. It's none other than Awqaf's very own Zainul Akaja. Uncle Zainul, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Always a pleasure having you on.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and always a pleasure to be here with you at Hilaal TV. And Jazakallah khairan for that.
I mean, no, it's an absolute pleasure. Uncle Zainul, let's touch on the historical aspects of it, because we always look at Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and just, what he established, close to 1,500 years later. It has changed the lives of so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, starting off in Makkah, and let's start at the very beginning of his mission. The mission was in Makkah, and he called all the people of the Quraysh in particular on the Mount Safa Marwa, and people wanted to know, well, what is it that you are calling us for? And he proclaimed the La ilaha illallah. And I think that was the first shock that people got, because they rejected him on that immediately. So for 13 years, he struggled in Makkah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in that 13 years, obviously he was building people. And, the Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Abu Bakr, the Ali, the many others who came along with him, and they migrated to Medina. And this is where in Medina now things start happening, where he starts creating new institutions, various rules are established, the whole Islamic way of life, the culture, the Salah is established, the Zakah is established, the Baytul Mal is established, and obviously the Waqf institution is also established, apart from other financial things about the market, the economy, the politics, the wars. So you see that Medina was, the whole mission was a transformation mission, and that whole mission was a game changer as well.
Sure.
So the Prophet ﷺ now, obviously with his mission of creating a whole new system, a whole new culture, now introduces various institutions as well. Waqf is one of those institutions.
And I think, Uncle Zainul, you've touched on it, making this a way of life, because, pre-Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, conquering Makkah, we've got this Meccan society which is completely wayward. It has every single element of kufr in it. And then you've got this system that's created that not only brings order, but it brings a balanced way of life, which would change the way we as Muslims are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you take the market, which he created, the balance in the market, the public protector, the Hizbah that he created in the marketplace, the missions that he sent abroad to the Persians, to the Romans. So the international relation starts, where he starts, contacting various other regimes as well, bringing them closer to Islam. He has alliances with all the tribes in Medina. And he creates the Medina Charter, in which there's various rules and regulations and agreements being done with the various tribes, and that leads to becoming a much more cohesive city and a society, and a city-state is created. So now we're talking about a state that was now established in Medina, the city-state of Medina.
And adding to that, of course, everything gets integrated. Faith, culture, civilization. but especially civilization, because there is now an Islamic civilization that is slowly being established, and at the head of it, of course, none other than our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when you look at how it was established, it was not just order, but it was one which was given out of dedication and love.
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing was the mosque in Quba, then the Masjid Nabawi as a central point of social interaction and social cohesion, where the mosque played that central role. Even the military went out of the mosque. The court cases happened at the mosque. It was really a community center. So, and that was the beginning and the role model that he played, which was then emulated by Muslims worldwide throughout our history.
The saying, "Lan tanalul bir," talk to us about that and how that has not just shaped what happened close to 1,500 years ago, but also how it shapes us today as Muslims.
Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up, because Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, lan tanalul birra hatta tunfiku mimma tuhibbun. This was in Surah Al Imran. And when this verse was revealed, it actually literally created a revolution in Waqf making.
Sure.
Because people came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, what is this all about? What must we do? I have got this wealth. What should I do with it? And this is where the Prophet ﷺ started advising the Sahaba, people that were close to him, to actually dedicate their land, and which was mainly what they had, their land, their orchards, and to dedicate the fruits of the orchard to various causes, like the poor, the needy, the ummah, the mujahideen, and so forth. So that particular verse. Then there was another very important verse as well. Man dha alladhi yuqridullahu qardan hasanan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks in Surah Baqarah, who is it, or who is there that will give us or give me a beautiful loan? And now this Allah is asking us to give him a loan. And you know, Sahaba came to him, and particularly one by the name of Abu Darda radiallahu anhu, and he said, does Allah want us to provide him with a loan, to be indebted to us? And he asked the Prophet ﷺ to give him his hand. So they hold hands together, and the Prophet says, yes, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. And so Abu Darda says, okay, I am actually dedicating and endowing my orchard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet says, you know, you are going to get your orchards in Jannah are going to be filled with pearls. So you know, so those were the kind of the Quranic verses were actually giving impetus to the whole notion of building this whole Waqf system. And this is where the entire community started, even the Sahaba, and you know, history records that every single Sahaba that had some sort of wealth made a Waqf. So the whole Waqf system actually spread like wildfire in Medina, and of course later generations in other parts of the world as well.
And you know, there's something interesting that you've touched on, Uncle Zainul, is that the Sahaba had, many Sahaba had so much of wealth, and yet, you know, their wealth was looking at the afterlife. They were looking at the year after. And that in itself, it lays a solid foundation, doesn't it, on how we as Muslims need to look at wealth, but look at wealth in a perspective of how much of the good that we can do can carry us through in Jannah, you know, should Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us that opportunity. And there is your lesson right over there, isn't it?
Yeah. And if we just remember that a lot of the Sahaba that came with the Prophet ﷺ, many of them came with nothing. They were literally made homeless. and wealthless, and they became self-sufficient in Medina. And you're quite right that the wealth that they had, they felt that the wealth that they had, in terms of the verse, that we cannot achieve our virtue and righteousness and our taqwa if we do not give our wealth.
Sure.
Because they understood that wealth belonged to Allah. We are merely trustees of that wealth. It's just an amana to us. I think they actually understood the concept of having that wealth, because they looked at the akhirah as also their reward, because that's what, coming back to our purpose in life is, our purpose for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us. That reminds me of the verse, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that Allah has not created man and jinn except as to worship Him and to be in servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And just my last point before we go to the break, Uncle Zainul, Jamad al-Akhir was a month that us as Muslims honor Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and just what his life was to being the right-hand man of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that in itself, I think a lot of us can look at as a waqf, him wanting to dedicate his life to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's another beautiful aspect with regards to learning from the Sahaba. But after the break, I continue my conversation with Zainul Qaji. We are touching on the power and the importance of Waqf. This is Waqf, a game changer. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Waqf, a game changer. It's a series that we are hosting here on Hilaal TV this Ramadan with none other than Waqf's Zainul Qaji. Uncle Zainul, I'm sure you've been asked this question for I don't know how many years, I don't know how many decades. For those who have been living under the rock, and I'm sure there hasn't been many people living under the rock, but for example, a non-Muslim would come to you and say, Mr. Qaji, what is the meaning of Waqf? So if there's some of our fellow compatriots in South Africa who are tuning into Hilaal TV and want to know what a Waqf is, what is the actual definition of it?
Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thanks. Yeah. I think that is a brilliant question. Because that is really the question that a lot of people ask. Sure. So if we just go back, I think Muslims who read the Quran will come across the little tiny word qif in the Quran, where it will tell you to stop. So literally, waqf means to stop. Qif means to stop, and it's derived from waqafa, which means that he stopped. So literally, that's the meaning of the word waqf. But from a Sharia perspective, from an Islamic perspective, waqf has been defined in different ways, but essentially it's about endowing an asset and dedicating its fruit.
Sure.
So to explain it, maybe we could look at endowing a tree, which is something physical and long-lasting and can bear fruit, and that fruit is what is dedicated to different causes.
Sure.
So if you endow the tree and dedicate the fruit, you could sell the fruit, you could consume the fruit,
sure,
you could distribute the fruit, but the tree remains there, and the fruit is provided in perpetuity.
Sure.
So that's basically the fundamental principle of it. In some countries it's called waqf, in some countries it's called waqif, waqif like in Turkey,
sure,
Indonesia, Malaysia, they say waqaf, in India it's also waqf, in North Africa it's actually called hubs, and plural hubus. So the plural of waqf is also awqaf.
Yes.
So essentially then, if we have to summarize it, a waqf is a voluntary donation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a fi sabilillah, as in the way of Allah, from the bottom of our hearts, from the goodwill and passion that we have, to donate this particular asset, which may be cash or property or any other asset that must be something that doesn't get consumed. So we could go into the different types of assets that can be donated, but essentially it's the donation of the asset and the dedication of the fruit.
Sure. Uncle Zainul, of course, there are different types of waqfs that can be defined. You've got khairi, you've got ahli turi, and you've got mushtarak. I think let's break each one down so that our viewers maybe get an understanding of what these types of waqfs are and where it places within it.
Okay, so essentially, like you mentioned, we've got three types of waqfs. We've got waqf khairi. Waqf khairi are charitable waqfs.
Sure.
These are for public benefit. And these could range from providing food, soup kitchens, medical services, health services, social welfare services, and basically any form of charity. And we could go into all the different types of charities. Then you have the waqf ahli or waqf dhurri. So here the waqf is dedicated to your family.
Sure.
And it could go on for a few generations. So when you make that waqf, the fruit and the benefit of that asset in perpetuity would go to your children, your progeny, generation after generation. And generally, the scholars and certain governments have also restricted it to like 3 generations.
Sure.
So because after that, it becomes so divided that you will really literally see nothing of it, and it could cause a lot of confusion. And 3-4 generations down the line, they don't really even know who the upline were.
Sure.
Yeah. And then of course the mushtarak is like a combination of the two. So you could have waqf khairi combined with a waqf dhurri. So if I typically have an asset, let's say a house, and I'm getting rentals out of it. So the house is the waqf, and the rental is the fruit of the
Sure.
waqf. And then I can stipulate how that fruit is going to be distributed, the rental. Either money will be distributed, or that in some way the money will be converted into, let's say, some commodities or something that will be given to the family.
Sure.
So in a way, maybe some people think that it's circumventing your Islamic laws of inheritance.
Yes.
But it's not really speaking, because one is really free to distribute one's wealth during one's lifetime. And this is the other thing about the waqf system, that it is preferable to do the giving and the gifting during your lifetime rather than when you pass away.
Yes. Uncle Zainul, a lot of the waqfs, and I want to touch on the 3 other aspects of it. We look at religious perspective, of course, and a lot of waqfs are established. Masjids is a big component of that, and the
Absolutely.
same for madrasas also. This was, if you look at Masjid al-Nabawi, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, along with the Sahaba, established, that was one of the first, waqfs one could look at.
Yes.
And the other one is, of course, Darul Arkam, the madrasa, the Islamic institution, which was established in Medina. So you look at those 2 institutions, and that really was, one could say, that laying the foundations for waqfs in the future.
So you see that masjids have become, and if we look at South Africa, the masjids are really one of the primary waqfs that have been created. And we see this throughout the country, thousands of either masjids, musallas, etc. And of course, what goes with that is all the madrasas, and now we have all the schools as well. So those religious assets that we have are all waqf properties, waqf assets. And this has been a trend throughout the world as well. Then you have the social assets.
Yes, yeah.
The social assets are our orphanages, our elders' homes, our libraries, our schools. Those are the kind of assets that are there to benefit the community, which are not really deriving any income. And then you have the commercial assets. Now, the commercial assets is something that we need to look at very seriously in terms of how we actually create our waqfs, because there are examples, for example, in Andalusia, where every masjid had a commercial waqf.
Sure,
and these waqfs supported the masjid. Now, we can't, that's one of the things that we're trying to look at as and encourage, that every single masjid should have a commercial component to it, a commercial waqf, because that will make us independent and self-reliant. So we do have examples of some of those in South Africa, like the Nurul Islam Masjid, the Rustenburg Masjid in Rustenburg, the central town masjid. They have waqf, commercial waqfs. So these three types of waqfs, the masjid waqfs, of religious benefit, spiritual benefit to people, community, social benefit. Then we have our social assets, which are social waqfs. Then we have the commercial assets. So those three types of assets are really very important, that make up our culture, our civilization, our universities, our libraries, hospitals, clinics. Those are the kind of assets that are waqf assets.
Sure.
And we've seen that throughout our history, that we've actually we've created those.
And before we go to the break, Uncle Zainul, obviously, people would say, okay, so how does zakah come into this? Obviously, there's differences with regards to this. For example, zakah is compulsory where waqf is voluntary. And then of course lays the foundation. For example, you've got to give 20% of your wealth or 2.5% of your wealth, whereas waqf is unlimited. There's no real changes with regards to that. So talk to us about that and how one needs to navigate knowing the difference between zakah and waqf.
Okay. So also an important question. So as you said, zakah is compulsory. Waqf comes from a feeling of goodwill from our hearts.
Sure.
It's got nothing to do with the compulsion, but it's also a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So going back to that verse, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. So we're giving out of what we love and out of for the pleasure of Allah. Zakah is something that is compulsory, that we have to do and we have to give. And it has a fixed percentage. Waqf, there are people that have given their entire wealth to as a waqf. And we have recent examples. For example, the Al-Raji in Saudi Arabia and dedicated his entire wealth as a waqf. And there was some part of it that he dedicated as the dedication of the fruit back to himself to cover his living, medical expenses, etc. Elderly man who created the Al-Raji Bank in Saudi Arabia. Then there are other differences, because zakah has got certain specified categories as per the Quran. In Surah Tawbah, verse 90, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given 8 specific categories, whereas waqf is completely available as whatever one has in one's heart to give. You can give for planting trees, you can give for, dedicate your waqf for providing medicines to people, whether it's for the rich or the poor, doesn't matter. You don't have to have any particular qualification to be a recipient of waqf, whereas in zakah you have to have you have to be a qualified person to receive zakah. So I think those are like the fundamental differences in both these different important charities.
Well, that comes to the end of session 1 of Waqf, a game changer. Uncle Zainul, Jazakallah so much, but the viewers would obviously stay tuned during Ramadan, as we will go ahead and give them much more with regards to the meaning and the understanding and the importance with regards to Waqf. That's the end of session 1. We'll have session 2 for you during this holy blessed month of Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.